Welcome to this edition of Viewpoint on Mormonism. I'm your host, Bill McKeever, the founder and director of Mormonism Research Ministry. With me today is Eric Johnson, my colleague at MRM. We are continuing our look at an essay that is on LDS.org titled Translation and Historicity of the Book of Abraham. It's the Mormon Church's explanation of what is a very controversial, unique piece of scripture that is pertinent in Mormonism. And they are trying to explain some of the controversies that surround this unique piece of Mormon scripture. Today, we are going to look at Facsimile 1 primarily, because in Facsimile 1, we have some, I'm going to try and be as discreet as I possibly can. And parents, if you have kids in the cars, this might be a good time to change the station for at least 12 minutes. But I don't know how else to approach this subject. Joseph Smith had in his possession this papyrus that scholars say really only dates back to around the type of Christ, but it's a funerary text. The Mormons are led to believe that this is a much older rendition of the writings of Abraham. Now, there's no evidence to support that. You have to take that by faith, and the Mormon Church today even admits that. But one thing we do know, the papyrus that Joseph Smith had did have some portions that were torn away. One of those areas is found in facsimile number 1. And in facsimile number 1, Joseph Smith gives an explanation of this illustration, this drawing. And there's a picture of what looks like a man holding a knife over a person lying down on a lion-headed couch. Over the head of the person lying down appears to be a bird. And so Joseph Smith gives the rendition, and he says that figure 1, this bird, is supposed to be the angel of the Lord. Figure number 2, the picture of a person lying down on the lion-headed couch, is supposed to be Abraham fastened upon an altar. Facsimile number 1 says that the drawing of what looks like a dark-skinned man, with pointy ears, I might add, is supposed to be the idolatrous priest of Elkanah attempting to offer up Abraham as a sacrifice. And then underneath this lion-headed couch, these are supposed to be the various gods of this idolatrous priest Elkanah. The gods of Elkanah, Limnah, Makmak-Ra, Korash, and Pharaoh is the way it's described in number 4. The problem, of course, as I said, there was a portion of the torso that was missing in the portion that Joseph Smith had in his possession that he purchased from Michael Chandler in 1835. Somebody drew in that portion of the torso and basically just went straight across, and it looks from the drawing of somebody just wearing some clothing that goes down to his knees with this dark-skinned man holding the knife over him. But the portion that is missing is, I think, very telling. Now, first of all, let me give you an explanation of what this facsimile should have looked like.
Before you do that, we should point out that this was found in 1966 at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. It was thought to be lost. All of this thought to have been burned in the Chicago Fire, Great Chicago Fire of the 19th century. And so we have that depiction from Facsimile 1 where somebody has drawn these things in. We can see it today exactly the way that is portrayed in every Pearl of Great Price. Anybody who has a Pearl of Great Price can go see the description that you just gave of the LDS rendition, supposedly, whether it was Joseph Smith who wrote that in or somebody from his time, his friends, whoever did, that was the way it was officially portrayed.
You're absolutely correct. The papyrus that Joseph Smith had was somehow fastened to another piece of paper behind it. And it was on that paper behind it that somebody drew in what they thought the missing portion should have had. But had they had the missing portion, I sometimes wonder what would Joseph Smith have said that this is supposed to represent. Now, I'm going to read you an explanation of what Facsimile 1 is supposed to be, as it's been described by qualified Egyptologists that have no connection with the Mormon Church whatsoever.
And it's common funeral papyri. So that's why they know what it should be, because this is not the first time this has ever been found. It's found countless times.
And I might mention that what I'm about to read can be found in the book By His Own Hand Upon Papyrus by Charles Larson, which is an excellent book that describes this whole scenario.
And what makes that book so valuable? You can pull out the chart and it will show you all that we're going to be talking about right now.
A full-color rendition of this facsimile is found in the book, and it's very valuable if you want to study this some more. But this is what it says underneath, what the facsimile number 1 should have looked like. The above scene from Egyptian mythology explained from the perspective of the science of Egyptology, : This picture depicts the mythical embalming and resurrection of Osiris, Egyptian god of the underworld. Osiris was slain by his jealous brother Set, who cut up his body into 16 pieces and scattered them. But Isis, beloved wife of Osiris, patiently gathered up the pieces and reassembled them. The jackal-headed god Anubis is shown embalming the body of Osiris on the traditional lion-headed embalming couch so that he might come back to life. Now, that's not what Joseph Smith's rendition shows, because Anubis has the head of a jackal, looks like a dog, a dark-skinned, or at least it's dark-colored.
And not a head of a man as he portrayed it.
Exactly. Remember, Joseph Smith didn't have the head because it was torn away at that particular point in the drawing. Osiris holds one hand above his head, palm down, in a sign of grief, while his soul, or B.O.A, is shown as a human-headed bird about to enter his body. Isis, meanwhile, has taken the form of a falcon and hovers over the groin of Osiris, who holds his phallus, hence this is known as an ithyphallic drawing, in anticipation of the procreative act which will make Isis pregnant with her son Horus. Horus will one day defeat Set in battle, thus avenging his father. The 4 sons of Horus, grandsons of Osiris and Isis, are shown as the heads of the 4 canopic jars below the lion couch. And then he gives the name that are associated with these heads on the 4 canopic jars. Now, the canopic jars were used in Egyptian mythology because they contained what was known as the viscera, the soft viscera of a body that was being mummified. The Egyptians believed that they would need certain organs in the next life, and so the Egyptians would take these organs and they would put them in these canopic jars. Joseph Smith certainly doesn't render it this way. But what's interesting is this is, as Eric has mentioned, a very typical funerary text. It has nothing to do with Abraham whatsoever. The bird in the upper right-hand corner over the head of the person that's lying down on the couch is not the angel of the Lord, as Joseph Smith claims, nor any of the other figures represented.
Let me ask you, Bill, because Joseph Smith is a prophet, could his interpretation also be true?
I would say no.
The point is, if Joseph Smith is true on the writing of it, then he would have to be true on this as well. But any objective Latter-day Saint who understands Egyptology and understands what the Egyptologists have pointed out would have to say that he got it wrong.
And they do say he got it wrong. And it's interesting because everything has to do with sex, it seems like, in this picture. And this is not the only drawing that we have that becomes problematic. If you look at Facsimile 2, and if you have a picture of Facsimile 2 in front of you, and if you don't, I would encourage you to find it. It's not hard to find on the internet. There's what's known as the hypocephalus. Facsimile number 2 also has a drawing on it, and if you want to find it very quickly, it's around at 4 o'clock in this round drawing. There's a person sitting on what looks like a chair. Joseph Smith claims that this figure 7, as it's numbered, represents God sitting upon his throne. Well, in Egyptian mythology, this is actually the god of fertility, Min. Now, when you think god of fertility, you think there's got to be certain parts involved in this. And here's what's interesting about this. If you look at the 1851 edition of the Pearl of Great Price, it has a drawing of the hypocephalus, facsimile number 2. And it shows Min sitting there with the necessary body part that makes him the god of fertility. But if you look at the 1973 edition, which I happen to be holding in my hand right now, I look at Facsimile 2, and that necessary body part is missing.
Now, I've never heard of that until you told that to me today. You've never shared that with me. How did you come across this?
I happened to find it quite accidentally when I was just doing some research on this, and I happened to have a 1973 edition of the Pearl of Great Price. And as I was looking at it, I noticed, hey, there's something missing here. Now, I remember it from the more modern editions, and if you look at a modern edition of the Pearl of Great Price, the necessary body part is included. But in the 1973 edition, it's gone.
Why do you think they took it out?
That's a great question. I really don't have a conclusive answer for that. But obviously somebody knew what it was. And for some reason in the 1973 edition, that portion of Min's body is missing. But it comes back in later issues of the Pearl of Great Price.
If you're a Latter-day Saint, doesn't that bother you that picture is in your Pearl of Great Price, your scripture? Go look it up, 4 o'clock on that drawing. Wow, that's something that a lot of Latter-day Saints probably never knew.
But as far as I understand, there is no discrepancy, or there's no difference of opinion as to what this character in the Hypocephalus, or Facsimile 2, or who he is. It is the god Min, who is associated with Egyptian mythology. There seems to be no disagreement on that. How did Joseph Smith come up with this representing God sitting upon his throne? And we have to assume from the context that it must be Elohim?
This is a mixing of paganism with supposed Christianity. This has no place in Christianity, and yet here it is something that is part of LDS Scripture.
It certainly is, and now you can see why this particular scripture that is unique to Mormonism is so controversial. What amazes me is the great lengths that Mormon apologists will go to try and protect the image of both Joseph Smith and to protect what they believe to be ancient scripture. This cannot possibly be ancient scripture. This is nothing but paganism. And they're trying to put a good face on this, but it doesn't seem to be working.
On our first show, we said if the Book of Abraham and the Book of Mormon are not true, the whole religion falls apart. I think we're seeing this, that this is a major problem.
We hope you have a great weekend.